Ooh, baby. We got a jam-packed Tuesday episode of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. And those playoffs are coming less than 3 weeks away. And we're taking a look at the top 10 most disappointing fantasy hockey seasons of the year.
You're Locked On Fantasy Hockey, your daily podcast on fantasy hockey. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back inside the lab to your daily source for fantasy hockey news and all of the news from across the hockey world that you need. Shout out to the everydayers making us your first listen every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Steele, look, there is a lot going on in the NHL. That's no doubt. You and I are getting antagonizingly close to breaking down all of the playoff everything. I'm not even going to get there because I'm so fired up. However, even though the graphic is messed up by me once again, that's my bad. If you're tapped in on YouTube, shout out to all the subscribers. That's me slacking in the mackin'. But we have to take a look at some of these disappointing seasons. The playoffs are less than 3 weeks away. We have to take a look at some of these pieces that I know you and I probably talked a lot about in terms of we thought they would be putting up much more production than they have. It's a bit of a rear view, but it will help all the fantasy GMs out there better prepare for next season and temper expectations, because I think, Steele, one of the best parts of looking at these players who have struggled is knowing where they should slot in next year's fantasy draft. And I know you were going to cover a bunch of angles and players. Hit me with your number 10, and let's giddy up. We're going to go all the way through one because I'll be solo tomorrow, and I'll take it away from there.
Yeah, you know, it's always hard to do some of these top 10 lists, especially when you're doing the most disappointing players of the season. And we're going to spend the next 2 to 3 weeks that time covering the playoff picture, the betting breakdowns, series breakdowns, top players to look out for in each series on each team. So that's what we're going to do over the next couple of weeks leading into the postseason. But figured this would be a good time for disappointing players that we've seen so far in fantasy leagues. Number 10, Johnny Gaudreau for me comes in at the 10 spot, rostered at 46%. He's been way down there from the years prior. 11 goals, 55 points in 74 games. And I know Troy's probably going to come after me in the comments potentially, but
Troy's getting a lot of love these days.
He's getting a lot of love. He's got the respect. For sure. But I mean, Johnny Gaudreau, this is a guy who had 74 points last year in his first year with the Columbus Blue Jackets and 115 the year before that. The shots are down, 145 shots, down from 220 the year prior. He's only got one power play goal. So, and again, I think I mentioned this a few episodes ago. Sometimes it just looks like he really doesn't care to be there and be actually putting any passion.
Might be a few guys on this list that fit that mold.
Yeah, there's definitely a few guys that fit that mold. And I truly believe Gaudreau doesn't want to be a winner and he doesn't care about winning. It just looks like that to me over the last couple of seasons, especially this year with 55 points in 74 games. So for me, I don't like the emotion I'm getting from Johnny Gaudreau, but even just all the stats are down. So that's why he comes in at number 10.
I don't think I can sit here and nitpick for you having a list of disappointing players, and it includes Johnny Gaudreau. Do I think there could have been more disappointing players? Perhaps, only because I'm ready to write this guy off in terms of what we even thought he would be close to in terms of fantasy production. We're keeping today short and sweet in terms of these breakdowns because we have so many players. So I'm just going to agree with you because he's just continued to be disappointing. And look, this is one of those ones that you might come at me a bit because Elias Sokin still is 22, 19, and 11. And the New York Islanders are hovering around for a playoff spot. And I think maybe he's a bit of a victim of the overall lack of success for the team because also let me throw a couple of numbers at you for Sorokin. And I guess it's just because I have such a high standard for this goaltender who finished in top six Steele in Vezina vote getting the past couple of seasons, back-to-back years. And he faces the most shots per game in the NHL. Sorry, that's the third per game. And he's faced the most overall so far of any goaltender. So his team has been heaving him out to dry on the regular. 906 save percentage. This is a guy who should be right around 925. This is a guy who should have 7 or 8 shutouts. He only has 3. So the fact that I think this team is allowing him to see that many shots, what do you think I'm going to say, Steele? We've seen it with the best goaltenders in the business. He's seeing too much rubber. Hellebuck, Vasilevsky, Georgiev. I'm not saying that he's in the same echelon, but the point remains. This team is leaving him out to dry. I'll say it for a third time emphatically. And just because, though, that's happening, I'm not going to hold back on my expectations. Sorokin hasn't been good enough, and I think he could have made honorable mention perhaps, but to me, because I do have that high expectation, he's on this list. He needs to be a lot better.
Yeah, and everyone knows that I've been high on the New York Islanders trying to fight for a playoff spot. Sure. So I agree with you there with Elias Sorokin. I think he has become a victim of his team's performance in front of him. He's been let down significantly, but also just not on the top of his game. So at number 10, I think that's a perfect spot for him. He just gets in there into the top 10 disappointing players. I appreciate that. At number 9, I know you have this player a little bit higher, but at number 9 comes Tage Thompson for me. 49 points in 64 games. Only 14 power play points this season compared to the 34 power play points he had the year prior, obviously that career year. And I saw a stat online. I couldn't find it again, but I tried to remember it as vividly as possible.
I'll try and help you out, pal.
He's only taken 12 slap shots and scored on 3 of them this year compared to 56 slap shots last year where he scored on 12. That's been a big factor for the Buffalo Sabres, especially on the power play.
Yeah.
Clearly it's affected both his production and the Buffalo Sabres. Like I said, on the power play, they went from having the 9th best power play last season to being 29th this year. So they're clearly defending the penalty kill over on Tage Thompson. And that's hurt their chances on the special team significantly. And I think a lot of us, maybe we jumped the gun on Tage Thompson a little early after the career year, 94 points in 2023. The upside about Tage Thompson is the peripheral stats are still very solid. 40 penalty minutes, 230 shots, 26 blocks, 75 hits. But to go from 94 points to 49, I know he's missed 11 games this year, but that's very significant drop off.
I think what's intriguing is also, like, just in the same vein as all of the stats you're mentioning in terms of the Buffalo Sabres having this downturn in terms of offense, is Rasmus Dahlin is leading the team in points. And that's not to say that he is not capable of having that kind of season. But when you see the players in that mix that we've talked about, and, I'm looking at Tuck, I'm looking at Cousins. I know you're going to mention him later in this episode. These are all players that have had down years in terms of offensive output. Then you factor in the goaltending struggles for most of the year. I know UPL has looked a lot better over the last 6 to 8 weeks, but you factor those two things in. And actually, a couple of these teams at the top of the list, Steele, the teams themselves all fall into the disappointing top disappointment mold. We expected more from them. I'll talk more about Tage Thompson at the top of my list because I think given his back-to-back year-over-year performance, he deserves higher expectations, and that's where I'm at with this list. Disappointments come along with when I think you have the ability to do what you should be doing and you do not. Speaking of which, this one is also a little iffy, but Josh Anderson is making $5.5 million, and last year he registered 21 goals in 164 shots on net. This year, he has 9 goals. He has significantly less shots, and he's still making $5.5 million. I know the probably point you could poke in this is it's Josh Anderson, and maybe I should have expected less from this guy.
I agree with you.
But the year before, Steele, he also popped 19. So he got paid as a guy who brings 20 and 20 value and throws the hits. The hits are still there. The peripherals are still there. But fantasy GMs, given that peripheral fill out, probably wasted some pretty good draft capital in taking Josh Anderson. I don't have his ADP up, but that's a disappointment for me in a very, very big way. His shooting percentage also, Steele, cut in half.
No, I 100% agree with you with Josh Anderson. He was he could have been on this list for me. I just had a few other names that made the cut instead of him, but I agree with you. I think the $5.5 million contract that he's making on AAV is one of the worst contracts in the NHL right now. It is. So it's up there it's probably top 5, maybe even top 3. We might get to a couple of bad contracts in this list for disappointing players. We're going to get to a lot of other players on this list. We got 8 through 1 continuing for this entire episode. Over to you, Flip.
Thank you, sir. It's jam-packed. Shout out to Steele. We're getting intense, pal. But you got to be making your bets over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The sports calendar is loaded, and FanDuel is making everything more exciting to get in on the action. Right now, new customers get that $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if you bet on the tourney, the MLB, NBA, NHL, and so much more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to make your first bet a big win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
And thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day long? You have to turn down the volume with all that shouting. Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. Free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day with the top stories, the biggest stories, without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channel app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Continue to hit the subscribe, the follow button, leave a 5-star review. We appreciate all that love and support you show us. Continuing, though, the conversation of the top 10 biggest disappointment players for this season. I'll keep this one very, cut and dry and short. Filip Gustavsson comes in at number 8 for me. I had a preseason prediction, a bold prediction that he was going to pop off for 30, 35 plus wins, take the Minnesota Wild to a top 3 spot in their division and make a deep playoff run. That has not been the case. 19-5-5 on the season, a .900 save percentage, and a 3.04 goals against average. I mean, that is just very disappointing to the year he had prior. 22 wins, 9 losses and 7 ties, a .931 save percentage, and a 2.10 goals against average.
So good.
Very disappointing, regressed season for him. It's been disappointing for the Minnesota Wild. And the Minnesota Wild, 2 reasons why they're missing the playoffs. Number one, the poor start in October and November. They lost the season right at the very beginning with the poor start, a lot of losses.
It can happen.
And the goaltending. The goaltending has been very abysmal. So those are the top 2 reasons for me, and Filip Gustavsson comes in at number 8.
And let's keep 8 and 7 short and sweet because we have the same players. And I'll just leave it at this with Gustavsson. He only has 100 career NHL starts under his belt. So there are some players on this list that I'm very concerned about their career trajectory. Cough, cough, Jonathan Huberdeau. Filip Gustavsson is on the positive end of these things because, 19, 15, and 5 with a .900 save percentage and his 3.00 goals against are not jumping off the page. But when you kind of piece together his entire body of work, Steele, I'm not even close to ready on giving up on him, especially when you look at his opportunity to still be that guy in Minnesota, at least for now. Jesper Wallstedt is probably licking his chops at this opportunity to maybe swoop in there in the next season or two. But I'm still going to say the positive trajectory is okay.
100%.
I think I'm going to throw that out there too for Matty Beniers because he is still so young. And this happens sometimes, right? You have regressions. And when I actually dug into Matty Beniers, and by the way, we both have him at 7, this is a bit of a tiny player. And I don't mean that as any disrespect. He's 6'2", but he's only 175 pounds.
Yeah.
I want to see this guy fill out his frame. And I know the NHL has changed, Steele, and I'm not here saying everybody needs to be a bruiser who crushes 12 tins after every practice. But at 21 years old, when he entered the league as a number 2 overall draft pick, let me just make sure that's right, number 2 overall draft pick, and he was basically a point-per-game player for that first, year or so of his career, and he wins the Calder. Again, expectations, it's disappointing this year that he has 12 goals and 32 points, not shooting the puck as much. He for sure has to be on this list. Do I again think, like Gustavsson, he might have the ability and all the time in the world to pick his career back up? 100%. But this year, big time disappointment from Matty Beniers.
Yeah, all the peripheral stats are down, going from 57 points in his rookie campaign to 32 points. I know there's still a few games left in the season, but it's been very insignificant. And I think just like Tage Thompson with the Seattle Kraken team and maybe even Matty Beniers, we got caught up in that glorious turnaround in their second year in the NHL where they made the playoffs.
He had 7 points in 14 playoff games, by the way, as well. So he looked not out of place in the postseason.
Exactly. So I think we just got caught up in the glorious turnaround from the Seattle Kraken their second year in. And I think looking back at it, we should have all probably seen this as a conclusion for the Seattle Kraken when they drafted their team in 2021. I mean, comparing the draft from Seattle to Vegas, just completely different ends of the spectrum there. It worked out for Vegas. It worked out in the second year for Seattle, but it doesn't look like it's working, or it's not working this year. And honestly, if it weren't for Joey Decord's crazy run, they might even be further down the standings. So it's been a fairly disappointing season for Matty Beniers. They've had significant injuries, but it could have been a lot worse for Seattle. At number 6 for me, I've got Dylan Cousins, another Buffalo Sabres guy, a guy who I was talking a lot about in the preseason drafts, the mock drafts, what the expectations were for the entire Buffalo Sabres team.
Mm-hmm.
He dropped from 31 goals to 15, went from 68 points to 42, only has 2 power play goals, 10 power play points total. The shots, the blocks, and the hits, they're still hitting, just like I was talking about with Tage Thompson as well. But just a very significant drop-off for a lot of the Buffalo Sabres players. We talked about it. It's a very young team. They're still developing their chemistry. They're still developing their own game right now. Especially the goaltending with UPL and Devin Levi. Those are 2 young goaltenders right now who are just getting their chance starting in the NHL. So, I mean, we expected big things from Buffalo. It didn't turn out that way. And just like the Ottawa Senators, and we're going to talk about a few of their players, they could be a very dangerous team in a year or 2 time.
I'm going to agree there. You and I had a little bit of differing opinions in terms of where we pecked them coming into the year. However, Dylan Cousins, I'm going to say, at 23 years old, much in the exact same breath of what we were just talking about, 42 points. And I'm not even going to disagree with you for 1 second, because I think my expectations were that high. Honorable mention for me. We can't nitpick it, but I think he can have just as good of a year as he did last year. Next season, he can step right back in. Tage Thompson's higher on my list because I'm not as certain. He had, and I'll get to Tage Thompson right now, and we'll get it out of the way because we're keeping it short, Steele. 145 regular season games for the start of Tage Thompson's career. He had 18 goals. Then he registers 85 over the past 2 campaigns. That's the kind of track record that is uncertain for a player who's at his age. Whereas Dylan Cousins, it kind of makes sense that he has this slow kind of progression. That's all I need to throw out there. Not going to disagree with you. Number 6 for me, Steele. Is that where I'm at? I'm all over the place.
Number 6.
Number 6. Come on. We can't have this list and not have Jonathan Huberdeau on here. Jonathan Huberdeau has pulled the biggest 180 in terms of fantasy production. And I don't, look, this could probably happen in a lot of players that are kind of at the 45, 55 point mark. And then they go down to like 10 or 15 or 20 and you don't really notice it. This man led the NHL in assists and had multiple 60, 70 point seasons and is now regressing to the point where I don't even know if he likes to play hockey, Steele. And no, seriously. And this has been well documented. He went from being a perennial all-star to now he's minus 25.
It's bad.
And he's going to finish with his lowest point total since becoming a player that had that all-star caliber. I don't know what's going on with Huberdeau. He could have probably been higher on this list. For me, he's at 6, and it's just obvious. I have to say it. What happened here, Steele? Because I don't know.
Well, we've seen it from a few players, like I just talked about. We saw it with Johnny Gaudreau when he went from Calgary to Columbus. We're seeing it with Jonathan Huberdeau. Jonathan Huberdeau now with Calgary, and it's happened for a few other players as well. It just seems like PierreLuc Dubois will definitely be getting to him. I have Jonathan Huberdeau a little bit higher on the list, and I'll get to him in the top 3. In the top 3 positions for me. At number 5, before we get to break real quick for myself, Jakob Chychrun comes in at number 5. And I know we have a few Ottawa Senator players here, but Jakob Chychrun comes in at number 5. Okay. And I said this before, I'm going to say it pretty much verbatim. He has been an anomaly to me at this point. He's 25 years old. The ceiling is so high for this player, but it seems so far out of reach as well. Again, verbatim from what I talked about him, I don't know, a couple months ago. First 30 games of the season, he had 24 points. He was 0 on the plus minus and 14 penalty minutes. The next 26 games after that, he had 6 points, a minus 15, 32 penalty minutes. And over the last 17 games, only 6 points as well. He has 36 points total on the season. Like I said, the defensive group for the Ottawa Senators has just been very abysmal. It's been a terrible season for them. I know a few episodes ago, we were talking about them bouncing back next year, which I still think they can do if they make a few changes on their blue line and in the blue paint. But Jakob Chychrun has to be on this list for me. He comes in at number 5.
Yeah, I guess I was just looking at this player a lot differently from you, although Ottawa needs to be spoken about as a collective group in terms of
Yeah, they should
disappointment.
be.
So I'm here for it. I just see so many more disappointing seasons from Chychrun. It's also Chychrun. It's also interesting that he did so much better under DJ Smith.
Yeah.
And then, Jacques Martin comes in and
It was a stupid firing. It was a stupid firing
you
for
just
the
mentioned it,
Senators.
though. You could see the drop off in the man's numbers almost
Yeah.
immediately. It's been the tale of two halves. However, I look, it is what it is. Why don't you take us to break? Because I got my fifth player ready to rock. It's going to be a short one, 5-1, giddy up, and we have it all ready for you after this commercial break.
Right after the break, today's episode is also brought to you by Sleeper. It's the final stretch of the regular season, and teams are battling for position in all four divisions. Regardless of where you are in the current standings with your favorite team, I want to remind you that you can win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. But it's not just hockey, people. NFL, NBA, MLB, CFB on the Sleeper app. Entries can be made in under a minute, and all you have to do is pick whether studs like Hellebuck, McDavid, Ovechkin, Crosby, Makar, if they will record more or less than their sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus minus, and more in a given game. To win a 100-time bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 players' stats. You heard me, Locked On Fantasy Hockey fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code Locked On NHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code Locked On NHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and location availability. And thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Continue to hit the subscribe, the follow button, leave a 5-star review. We appreciate all that love and support you show us Monday through Friday, 7 o'clock in the morning. Flip, over to you. Number five most disappointing player this season.
This one's also been well documented. PierreLuc Dubois is a player that before the age of 25 put up multiple 60-point seasons. And those weren't like, oh, that was a stretch. It was the best we've ever seen. That's what he'll top out at. It was even more so, if he's scratching 60 points now, what can this kid do as like a legitimate, not kind of Evander Kane sandpaper power forward, but a big body who can do it all?
Yeah.
And he has just fallen off a cliff. And I'm almost ready to just seal the deal on this kid as someone that, you've heard me talk. He's like, a decent waiver wire ad. You think he's going to pop off. Maybe you get him sneaky in the mid to late rounds of your draft and he pops off. It's just not been happening. And when you look at that trade once again, and you kind of look at where the LA Kings are and, their inability to roll 3 lines. I'm not going to blame it all on PierreLuc Dubois, but they sacrificed Velarde, Iafallo, Kupari, and a second-round pick to bring this guy in. And then you're looking at the LA Kings kind of hovering around, doing not as well as we expected them to do, Steele. This PierreLuc Dubois situation could go from bad to ugly for GM Rob Blake in LA, and he for sure is a top 5, again, disappointing player. By the way, Kevin Cheveldayoff looking like an absolute genius. Even with Velarde out, Kupari, we're uncertain. Iafallo, solid. It already is a huge knock out of the park type of situation. And I think, Steele, these LA Kings, I don't know about them going into the postseason, especially if these kind of secondary pieces can't get it done. Also, he's playing with Trevor Moore and some really good players in the mix. So there's no excuses.
There is no excuses, and I'll get to PierreLuc Dubois in a little bit later in this episode. But I mean, depending on how this postseason goes for the LA Kings and what he is able to do for them, it could be. I know they just signed him, but it could be a very intriguing story going into the offseason with this player who everywhere he's been. I'll save it for when I get to him. At number 4, I've got Joonas Korpisalo, back-to-back Ottawa Senator players. 19, 21, and 4 on the season with an .891 save percentage and a .327 goals against average. I had him on my fantasy team for the first half of the season, dropped him. He's been absolutely atrocious. He's played 48 games this season, the most of his career, and he's been bad in almost every single start. As bad as the Ottawa Senators have been collectively as a group, I mean, poor defensive efforts, giving up countless leads, struggling superstars, injuries, all of that is noted. Nothing has been worse than the goaltending tandem of Anton Forsberg and Joonas Korpisalo. 15 times the Senators have allowed a goal on the first or second shot of the game. And that was 4 weeks ago.
That's bad.
It might be closer to 20 now at this point
That's
in the
bad.
season. And I want to preface or end it in preface by saying this lastly.
Whoa.
The Ottawa Senators are 12 points back of a playoff spot right now.
Okay.
They could potentially be fighting for a wild card spot if they had better goaltending. And I know they've been bad all around, offensively, defensively, goaltending. If they had even an ounce of better goaltending, they could actually be potentially fighting for a wild card spot right now. So a lot of this blame goes on the 2 goaltenders right now.
I can't disagree. Also, and look, I'll save this breakdown for the Ottawa Senators, who I have higher on this list. Let me just leave it at that because I agree with what you're saying. Number 4, Timo Meier. Before the last 15 or so games, 15 or so games, he only had 10 goals through 46 games to start this season. I know he was a little banged up, and he's really picked it up over his last 15, registering 20 points and 13 goals. If not for that last little pickup steal, this is looking like one of the biggest reasons the New Jersey Devils are where they are. And, look, you can say, Dougie Hamilton and injuries to key pieces. But in terms of the guys who have been on the ice for the most part of the season, Timo Meier is a huge disappointment because he is one of those fantasy darlings that you kind of look at. And you may have invested in him quite highly. And right now, if you manage to make the playoffs and he's doing what he's doing, you're probably not even worried about it because who cares about that first half? But there'll be fantasy GMs out there who missed. And his slow start, and not just a couple of weeks, I mean, couple of months, would have had a big deal to do with that. He was a big piece at last year's deadline. And to me, given my expectations, and I know that's one of the things I keep saying, he is one of the biggest disappointments. And at number 3, since we've talked about him, I'll just get it out of the way. It's Tage Thompson, and it's for the exact reasons I talked about. But hit me with your take on Meier.
Timo Meier, he probably should come in at number 3 for me. However, I went with a different player, and it's more just because of, again, I understand coming off a very significant injury, coming off, his minutes are down, and I'll talk about that player. But I agree with Timo Meier. It's been the entire team with the New Jersey Devils has been disappointing, and that's been a significant part. And even with Jack Hughes with the injuries, Dougie Hamilton getting injured, it's just been a very chaotic season for New Jersey. And having Timo Meier not producing at the best of his ability, at least on a, other nightly basis, because I know Jack Hughes is going to do his thing every single game when he's playing. Timo Meier has been a significant part along with the goaltending. So he probably should be at number 3 for me. At number 3, I just put him in here because I felt like I had to. Connor Brown comes in at number 3 for disappointing players. Nothing of significance fantasy-wise. I think Connor Brown could have been a very sneaky pickup if he was actually producing. But again,
I don't know about this one, Steele, but I'm going to let you go.
He's coming off of significant injury. He played 4 games last year with Washington. I understand it. He comes over to Edmonton, though. Sure. He's supposed to be playing with Connor McDavid. He's supposed to be playing on that top, at least in the top 6 group. And he doesn't score his first goal until the 55th game of the season. He's got 9 points in 61 games. I know he's been a perennial 35 to 40 point player a season on the high end. Sure. I thought that's what he would be shooting for. At least, expectations would be like that with, again, playing in the top 6. But I just felt like I had to put Connor Brown in here because he didn't score his first goal until the 55th game. But again, nothing of fantasy significance with this player.
I think it would have made a whole lot more sense if this was the kind of top 10 disappointments coming out of the draft, because I know Connor Brown was one of those sexy, attractive ads for going to play up in the top 6 in Edmonton. But for me, it's just he doesn't crack the list because of all the other really good players
100%,
who have disappointed. But Erik Carlson, and this one's the shortest one I need to say, 101 points a year ago. He's at 47. There's a possibility he doesn't even get 50. Last year, he's playing with the Sharks. This year, he has Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin, and for a good chunk of the year, Jake Gensel. And I know the Pittsburgh Penguins have a lot of flaws, but you don't really look at that when you see a guy put up 101 points and it's Erik Carlson. There are a lot of GMs out there who have probably drafted this player as one of the first D-men off the board, and he's not going to bust 50 points after triple digits last year. He would have been the number 1 disappointment if not for the Ottawa Senators as a whole. Joonas Korpisalo, Tim Stützle, the Ottawa Senators special teams. No disrespect to Brady Tkachuk and, developing players. I was going to throw Jake Sanderson in there, but he's still developing. Yeah, Shane Pinto has been great as well. So, and there's obvious, you and I talked about it and you mentioned it. This team still has all kinds of upside, and they might be the best suited to put this bad season in the rear view and actually make noise next year. So this isn't me just poo-pooing on the Ottawa Senators. But when you have Timmy Stützle, and I know he's going to still finish with 70-plus points, but when you establish yourself as a player, I think he scored 39 goals last year.
He did, and he has 18 this year.
He has
brutal.
18. So there you go. And this just rounds out my point with expectations. When I see a player do that, and it wasn't like, oh, that was lucky. He had a bunch of David Clarkson like tap-ins. Timmy Stutz, huge disappointment. Jonas Korpisalo with the opportunity. 891 save percentage, disappointing. The rest of the team, mostly disappointing. The Ottawa Senators and those players, Steele, they're right at the top of my list, and I know you're feeling that take.
Feeling it 100%. That's why I had at least 2 Ottawa Senator players in this top 10. This is where I think I'm a little bit shocked with your placement of top 10 players right now. And I'm not going to hate on it whatsoever, but I'm surprised that you don't have Jonathan Huberdeau and Pierre-Luc Dubois number 2 and number 1, because I have Huberdeau number 2 and Pierre-Luc Dubois number 1 for
they
for
did
2
the same
guys
thing last year, though. That's why. Like I expected them to be better, but a lot of these players are coming off of heaters. Those two players are coming off of
when you have 2 players, one who's making $8.5 million,
that's
another
wild.
who's making $10.5 million.
Yeah, true.
Again,
good point.
55 points for Jonathan Huberdeau was very significant, but there was a lot that going into this season with the group that they had, and I get very chaotic couple of years for the Calgary Flames. Go from 55 to what is he at now? 45, 46?
Yeah, and he's got a minus 25 rating, and he's just looking like he's lost.
It does, like you said, it doesn't look like he even knows how to play right now. He's not the playmaker he once was when he was in Florida. He's not even shooting the puck on net. And I understand it's a completely different team now, but that's a huge regression, even to go from 115 to 56 down to 44. Sure. And I know there's still a couple games left.
Sure.
Pierre-Luc Dubois has to be number 1. I think that's what I'm most shocked about is a guy who had 60 points last year, 60 points the year before that. He's been 60 points throughout his career. Seems to have a bad attitude whichever team he goes to. And just like you said, Rob Blake is going to be like losing his mind at this player if he hasn't already lost it. So for me, Pierre-Luc Dubois, again, making $8.5 million, just over 30 points. Has been up and down. He's played a lot of minutes on the 4th line, a lot on the 3rd line. That's been a huge player, a huge regression for the LA Kings and PLD.
I can't deny those, like the argument you're trying to make. I guess, again, just me personally, seeing what I've seen from him, my expectations weren't as high. So for me, I wasn't going to be drafting him nearly with as much investment. Ergo, this disappointment isn't as large. Is it still big? Does he still deserve to be at 5? Or in that top 5, I'm with you. And, look, subjective list. The main point is what we said off the top. Be wary of what you're doing with these players next season. You just have to maybe do a double take and dig into these numbers a little bit more. Also, who knows where these guys are going to be come next season, Steele?
Yeah, I think the only guy that I'm not worried about on this list as significantly as the other guys is or I guess 2 guys. Yeah, no, I'll say 1 guy. Tage Thompson. I think that's the only guy I'm not worried about.
Okay.
I'm not too worried about because of what they have going for them. Just like the Ottawa Senators, is a very young team.
Yeah, okay.
They're prospering. Even though it's a huge regression, and I completely agree with you, I'm not too worried about it because, again, the blue line is going to be absolutely elite with Bowen Byram there now, Rasmus Dahlin, Owen Power, Matthias Samuelsson.
Sure.
Hopefully Dylan Cousins bounces back. Hopefully Tage Thompson bounces back. But that would be the only guy I'm not too worried about. Everyone else, they're dead. They're dead to me. They're done. I've never drafted them whatsoever.
Tell me how you really feel.
That's the top 10 disappointing list. Let us know who you would have in your top 10, who we got right, who we got wrong. Let us know in the comments down below on the YouTube channel. Thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Once again, hit the subscribe button, hit the follow button, leave a 5-star review. We appreciate it. Thank you again so much for tuning in for today's episode with Flip and I. Have a great day. Good luck with all your bets out there, and we shall see you back here again tomorrow.
Peace.